Jambo, Karibu, everybody. Jambo, Karibu. This is your host, Dr. Ruth Vitsemmo Akumbu, and I am the host of Jambo, Dr. Akumbu, bringing you cultural relevant, multifaceted conversations and reflections, intersecting education, entertainment, and business, committed to DEIB and cultural capacity building. My guest today is Kevin Coffey, Professor of Communication Studies at West Los Angeles College. Go West! Today we will be discussing thinking in education. We will address some issues and offer you some solutions. Hello, Kevin. Jambo.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Awesome. So we already know about your names, and you, Kevin. You're the professor of
Communication Studies at West Los Angeles, and I'm also a lecturer at California at Cal State University at Long Beach. So I'm at a couple places now.
Right. Congratulations on expanding. Everybody knows your name from our last episode, which I will put the link in the description below for anybody who wants to know Kevin's name and the fun stories that come with Kevin's names. So yes, before we dive in, check out Kevin's name in the bio from our last session. Now, today we want to talk about the boogeyman of education. We want to talk about thinking in education overall. So, Kevin, what are your thoughts on the subject, just broadly, before we start diving in?
Well, broadly, I believe we don't do enough thinking in education, nor do we do enough thinking about thinking in education. Mostly, and this is going to go into what we're going to discuss. Mostly, what we are talking about when we talk about thinking, is we're actually talking about teaching our machines to think, or artificial intelligence, AI. When we talk about getting our students to think, we just use sort of this blanket term, thinking. Yes, we want you to think about this subject. Okay. What does that mean? What do you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have an 18-year-old son. And if I say, son, think about this for a minute.
Right.
Think about what you're doing.
Yeah.
What am I really asking him to do?
Right.
Does he know? Are we sharing meaning there, which is the essence of communication? Are we sharing meaning? Are we meeting in the minds?
Mm-hmm.
Is he thinking this? Is he envisioning the same thing I'm envisioning?
Yes.
And if not, then there's a huge miscommunication. And he might think he was thinking, but I'm thinking, no, you didn't think about that at all.
Right. That is such a great point, because I remember the story of my niece recently. She posted something on her WhatsApp page, and I looked at it and I was like, okay. And I was like, really? And that was like trying to provoke her to think, right? And I'm giving these very short sentences. Okay, really? But I'm like, think about it. And then then she's like, oh, it's nothing, it's just a video. And then I was like, think about it critically. That doesn't help her. Like, what am I asking her to do? So if she doesn't do anything, or she reacts negatively, or she or she blocks me next time she's posting something, it does not help her in any way for me to just say, think about it. Have I taught her how to think about stuff? From what perspective am I telling her to think about it? So I can't just tell a child, what are you not thinking? What is this? Why can't you think? What, like, why are you acting without thinking? Have I actually taken the time to give this child what they need to think? And is what I'm thinking, like you're saying, is what I'm thinking what I'm expecting her to think? Is that the same directions in which do I want her to conceptualize exactly what I'm conceptualizing? Or in her head, she's conceptualizing something completely different and thinking it's okay. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh no, that's not what I want you to think about. So that communication, like you said, is a huge missing gap, even though we're talking about thinking and telling them to think.
Exactly. And so, that's the big missing element in education. You know, as you come up from, kindergarten, even through college, undergraduate, we give students, we say, here, know this. Okay. And at some point, we'll actually say, think about this. We want you to think about this. And what we've not done, and what we've not done a good job at, what for the most part, we're still not doing a good job at, is giving them an understanding of what we mean when we say, think about this.
Right.
And because thinking is not, and I don't know how much we'll get into this, but thinking is not one thing. Thinking is many things. If you talk to computer scientists, this is what has got them, this is one of the puzzles that they've had to put together in terms of getting in terms of developing artificial intelligence, is determining what exactly is thinking and what is actually meant. Because when you because when you want to program a computer to think, when you want to develop a thinking algorithm, you have to be very precise about what it is you want this machine to do.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're not that precise with people.
That is
and
so true.
telling them, okay, this is precisely what I want you to do. This is what I want you to carry out. And so, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, even when you look at a dictionary definition of thinking, it seems a little bit vague. So listen to this: the process of using one's mind to consider or reason about something. So using thought or rational judgment or / intelligence. Okay. What does that mean to a child?
What does that mean? Exactly. Not just a child, but what does it mean to a student?
Even to an adult.
I can talk even to an adult.
Yeah.
I can talk to my undergraduates. I can talk to my very learned colleagues about this notion of making a rational judgment. If I talk to 10 of my colleagues about making a rational judgment, I'm going to get 11 different answers about what a rational judgment is. And so, and we'll get to this towards the end of our discussion, I think. How do we solve that problem?
Right.
How do we solve this? And from my academic perspective, what's a miscommunication where we're missing each other? We're not sharing meaning in what we mean by, say, a rational judgment, or what we mean by thinking all together.
Yes. So now you were talking about algorithm and how when we talk about thinking, we program it. That brings me to the boogeyman of education today. Do you want to touch on the boogeyman of education today, so that we connect the algorithm to thinking, and then as we dive in, people have a clear picture of the craziness that is going on in education today attached to thinking in general?
It is absolutely crazy. The new, as you put it now, and you put it well, the new boogeyman is this thing called Chat GPT, which is an artificial intelligence text generator. And what this thing can do is, what it's said to do is, it can create human-like text. In other words, it can create text that a human being, you or I or anybody listening, they couldn't tell that a machine did it. Okay, which is just incredible.
Yes.
And it's scaring all of us in academia to death, because now what can happen is, because right now this is a free utility.
Right.
And so when we give our students a prompt, say, to write something, in my case, I might say, create a speech on a certain topic, a persuasive speech on why we shouldn't text and drive, for example, which is not a speech I would give my students. But anyway, they could give that prompt to this Chat GPT, and the Chat GPT would ask the inputter a few questions, and then develop this kind of presentation.
So we have gone from plagiarism to programming computers to think for us, instead of programming the kids and to think for themselves and be excited about thinking. So
Exactly.
yeah.
No, exactly. And there's a lot we could do a whole podcast on this chat GPT and its potential impacts in higher education,
Right.
and higher education, period.
Right.
But the big thing to me was this is, and I think it led us to this topic, is that the creation of text or writing, to me, is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Embodies thinking. This is the creation of the text is the output of thinking. And so when our students, or when we as a people move from wanting to produce this thinking to wanting a machine to produce this thinking for us,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think we are at the precipice of doing ourselves a disservice. I won't say it's a disservice yet, but I'm saying we can see doing ourselves a disservice from this position. So,
Right.
and I think, oh, go ahead.
Okay, it's like I think to a certain degree, we a lot of students have been doing themselves a disservice already, because students that plagiarize, or students that would have somebody else write their papers for them, this new algorithm is just a less expensive way of doing all of that. So we have already started on that track. So we're, like you said, we're at the premises now, but it's like we've progressively been coming to this place that we are today. And we need to really seriously think about doing a U-turn, because we need our kids to be excited about thinking for themselves.
Absolutely. Because we need a thinking populace.
Right.
We don't want a populace that is not solely, but largely dependent upon a utility to think for us. We don't want thinking to be the realm of a very narrow few and a great number of machines.
Right.
And so what's interesting to me is, so and I'll use your analogy. What's brought us to this point?
Yes.
And I think there are three things that really have brought us to this point. And the first of this is that we have, at least from my perspective, what I've seen is that we have a group of students who are literally afraid of thinking.
Yes.
If you listen, just go to any college campus, go to any high school campus, and listen to how students speak. I will bet you whatever you want, dollars to dimes,
Yeah.
that you will hear "I feel" more than you hear "I think."
I agree 100%. When I came to the United States, that confused me a lot, because every conversation somebody said, I feel, I feel, I feel. I was like, why is it that everybody's talking about feelings? Like, why is it that everybody's talking about I feel? This is a situation where you're supposed to be thinking. Why are you talking about I feel? So now, after living here for 20 years, I'm starting to use the terms I feel, I feel. But that was never me. It was more, it was more I think, I think.
Exactly. And it's okay to say "I feel" when it's actually a feeling that you
Appropriate.
are trying to articulate. Like,
Exactly.
I feel love, I feel
Mhm.
hungry, I feel cold,
Sad. You know.
sad.
Yeah.
Exactly. Those kinds of things are properly articulated with the term "I feel."
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel we should go to this store as opposed to that store. No, that's an "I think." You know, that's an "I think."
Right.
But students are afraid of thinking. And one of the reasons I think that students are afraid of saying "I think" comes from the thing we have drilled. And this, as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a part of that. So I'm not exempting myself, but I'm
Right.
I'm trying to get better. The thing that we've drilled into students is this fear of being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There is such a great social penalty in being wrong. If you don't have the right answer,
Mm-hmm.
you you are penalized socially. And a lot of our students today, they don't want that. They don't want that penalty. Whereas when you say I feel, you're always right
Mhm.
because it's you, it's your feeling.
Mhm.
But somehow when you think, when we say we think, we can't be wrong there,
Right.
you know. So I think that's one of the things. So there's this fear of thinking, and really it's a fear of being wrong.
Being wrong. Yes.
Well, yeah. Well, I love when people say, when people tell me, "Oh, yeah, I'm afraid of flying." I had a student say that to me on the other day, and they said, "I'm afraid of flying," and I'm like, "Are we afraid of flying, or are we afraid of crashing?"
Very good. Change of perspective.
Because most people, the act of just staying up and going up, staying
Mhm.
up, and then coming down, that's all right with them.
Mhm.
It's this notion of crashing, of falling.
Right. What
That's
happens when I start coming down?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the fear.
Mhm.
That's the fear. So yeah, when people talk about, when I say they're afraid to think, what they really are is afraid of being
Being
wrong
wrong. Mhm.
in
Yeah.
that thinking.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that because in one of the episodes I have the fear of failure. One of my episodes is the fear of failure, and this will tie in really nicely, and I'll put that also in the description below because I think it will tie nicely with what you just nailed on right now: the fear of failing and the fear of being wrong. Students don't want to be wrong. Nobody wants to get that
Nobody wants.
D.
Nobody wants to be wrong.
Nobody
You
wants to
know,
get an F in the paper and they have to repeat the class and pay for another class, or they pay back with time, with money, with everything. So they don't want to be wrong.
and there's also there's a social regard that you have that you get. There's a social reward that you get when you're right.
Yeah.
There's a certain esteem boost
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get, that's taken away from you
Mm-hmm.
when you are seen as wrong.
Right.
And so people would rather just, and none of, most of us, I won't say none of us, most of us don't want to be wrong. We want to be right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to be right in what I'm saying right now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
You and me both. We don't want to
you
mislead anybody, right?
that's right. And so there's a great fear in not articulating that. So people would much rather say nothing
Mm-hmm.
or say I feel than to say I think.
Right.
The second thing I think we've already touched on. This is the second problem with think. We've already touched on it. We don't know what we mean by think.
Mm-hmm.
So like we both said, you said your niece,
My niece.
and I was telling my son, think about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean exactly?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so if people don't know what it means to think, I think intuitively, because it's so visceral, we know what it means to feel.
Mm-hmm.
If I say I feel some emotion or feel some physical sensation, we know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas thinking, we're not really sure.
Right.
And what goes along with that is the third thing, I think, is that we're not taught how to think. And again,
Mm-hmm.
as an instructor, you know, that's on me. We're not taught how to think.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we spend billions on showing students what to think.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a subject matter.
Right.
American history, for example.
Yes.
We don't really want you to think about it. What we want you to do is memorize this set of facts.
Mm-hmm.
Take this set of facts in, and then I'm going to ask you questions about them, and you're going to give that set of facts
Mm-hmm.
back to me.
Right.
And that's what we want you to do.
That is true. And that's why textbooks are such a hot commodity.
And
Hey,
so,
I'm not saying I love buying them, and I buy them in the soft copy and the hard copy, but it's all about what they want you to think. If I write a book, it's about what I want you to think about. Like I'm not gonna produce something where I don't want you to think. But we're saying that society needs to shift and give more room for children to think outside the box and give them the tools to think outside the box and help them not to have this fear of being wrong.
Well, you just I had a note here,
Oh, go
and
ahead.
you no, you just sort of gave the solution. I mean, you just gave the three-pronged solution, I think. Um, if I may sort of restate it for
Yes,
myself, for your audience,
yes.
you just said it.
Wow.
You just said it. The first thing, let's think in terms of possibilities, of opening lines of inquiry, as opposed to thinking in terms of right and wrong.
Mhm.
I think that's the first step, because that can, I think, alleviate this notion of this fear of thinking. For example, in my classrooms, I like to tell students on the first day that there are no wrong answers in this class.
Mhm.
And they all look at me side-eyed. What do you mean there's no wrong answer? And even some of my colleagues, when I tell them I do this, they go, what are you talking about? And I said, look, I tell my students, like, for instance, on an exam,
Mhm.
there are some answers I want you to match.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, if you match them, I go, yay. And if you don't match them, I don't go, I go, you didn't make the match. That's what I say. I say you didn't make the match. Not that you were wrong per se, but
Mhm.
that you didn't make the match.
Mhm.
And I think students take to that more so than you were wrong. I mean,
Mhm.
similarly in discussion, when I have something in my head that I would really like them to come to, if students give me an answer that doesn't match what's in my head, I don't go, oh, that's wrong. I actually go, oh, that could be a great line of inquiry. Oh,
Mhm.
that's a possibility I didn't see. The only thing is it doesn't match what's in my head.
Mhm.
So if we move towards greater possibilities, bigger lines of inquiry, I think we can get students to take the chance to think a little. And that's what you just said. You said, get out of this right and wrong mindset. You know, the only thing I'm saying here is, instead of just simply saying what we should get out of,
Right.
let's talk about what we should get into.
Into. Mm-hmm.
And then you hit the second one. You said, let's talk about thinking in terms of specific tasks associated with thinking. In other words, when I say think about it, or when we say think about it, rather, what do we explicitly mean? And now, we don't have the time, and I personally don't have the expertise to talk about all of the tasks associated with thinking, because there's a lot of them. But, like, for instance, do we mean analysis, breaking something down, breaking some concept down? Do we mean explanation, which is, you know, uh, describing something in a way that it makes sense to somebody else, so that somebody else can understand it in the same way? Question generation. You'd be amazed if you ask graduate students even, put up a random picture. I have a picture of a young lady, a young woman standing in the middle of the street facing a mountain with a camera. And I say, how many questions can you generate from this picture? I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And initially, students get stumped because they're locked into this. Again, going back to the first one, they're locked into this thing. I don't want to get it wrong. They haven't opened up possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I just say, ask the stupid question, like, where did she get the pants she's wearing? Just ask. And once they go, oh, okay, we can ask them, then they start to roll. And so by generating these questions, now once they generated these questions, now they become more inclined to look for these answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that question answer is the essence of thinking.
Right. So are you therefore saying that providing a little bit more context to saying just think it's the best way to go. And the structuring it in the form of questions actually help them now better contextualize it and better know what to do.
Yes, what I'm saying is what we've done is we've, like, for instance, with question generation and then asking and then answering, rather, what we've done is we've given our students a specific task.
Right.
And so when we say think, it's not just this broad umbrella term, but a very specific task. Okay, I want you to generate some questions about something. Choose one of those questions and then answer it for us. Because typically when we inform someone, what we're doing when we inform them is we're actually answering a question. So we're actually answering a question, and that's again part and parcel thinking. And so so there's that, and there's also there's cause and effect. There's this thing called first, important, and priority, which is a way of organizing material. What comes first, what's most important, and what's a priority. These are all ways to organize material. There's best and worst case scenario thinking. Like, when you, like, for instance, with your niece, with that post, you could ask her, like, instead of saying, think about this critically, you could say, okay, do a best and worst case scenario for this. So what are the best things that can happen? List the best things that can happen from posting this. Okay, now list the worst things that could happen in posting this. See, now she's thinking in a productive way, and it gives you all a place to discuss things. So you can now get an insight into, okay, she was only looking at the possible benefits of posting whatever, and she didn't look at maybe some of the potential, I don't know, maybe the potential harms in posting something like this.
Right.
So
yeah, I completely agree.
And you can get a great deal of insight into how she's viewing what she's doing, and it gives you a point of departure. Something I like to do with my students is what's called Bayesian inference, which is it's a big fancy name, but really all it is that I ask my students, I say, okay, what could happen in this situation? Name all the things you can think of that can happen in this situation. They name 4 or 5 things in some given situation. And then I say, okay, put a probability, assign a probability to each of these. Now, this has to equal to 1. We can get into more of that. And this gives people an idea of how do they think this thing is going to happen? And that gives me insight. I can look at it and go, oh, this is what they think is really going to happen. This they think, that's not going to happen so much. And this gives them a way to look at their own thoughts on things. So, I've just named six thinking tools here. And if we were more precise in saying what we mean by thinking, as opposed to using just the general umbrella term, I think we would be further along.
Right. Could you just run the 6 again, like just quickly?
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Analysis, explanation, question generation, first, important, priority. It's called short for FIP, FIP, first, important, priority, cause and effect, and what they call Bayesian inference. These are just 6, and there are many more such tools.
Right.
And I'm going to go to the final thing you said earlier, which was explicitly teach these things in school. Like you think Bayesian, like, again, Bayesian inference, it's got like this scary name. You can teach kindergartners that. You can say, if I open the refrigerator door, which one of these 3 things is most likely to happen? And they can order those for you. And that's nothing more than a Bayesian inference. That's nothing more than you're not doing it numerically yet. But that gets little kids started saying, this is most likely to happen, this is next likely to happen, and this last thing is probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with kindergartners.
Right. Hey, I wanted to ask you one thing before we go. What is the how do you know, with, for example, we have the boogeyman of education today, and students not thinking, and they plagiarizing, they're getting others to write their papers for them, they're getting algorithms to write their papers for them. How do you actually know? Are you panicked about this whole thing? If so, why? And if not, why not? And how do you know when a paper belongs to a child or not? And how to solve those issues?
Much to the chagrin of many of my colleagues, I am not overly panicked by this.
Right.
Now, I have smaller classes. I don't have the huge lecture classes, so I'm fortunate in that sense. But for me, it seems relatively easy. If we analyze, that is, break down the problem a little bit, if we analyze the situation a little bit, what we can find is that, look, I can easily talk to a student, read a paper, talk to a student, ask that student a couple questions about the content of that paper and the concepts within the paper, and I can know either they wrote it, I go, wow, that was great, or you didn't write this. You didn't write this.
Yep.
Also, the voice people have in papers is not radically different. It can be, but that's mostly for more sophisticated writers. Radically different than their discussion voice. I won't say their normative informal voice, but their discussion voice. And so by just discussing this with the student, not even for a prolonged period of time, 5 minutes, you can get a good sense of, did they write this paper or speech in my case? Did they write this or did they not? And if they didn't, you take the appropriate measures, whatever that might be for your class or institution. So I don't see it as this huge impediment. Right. But I do see it as another way for students not to think. But like you said earlier, we must give students every reason to think. We should encourage them and incentivize them to think and give them the tools and teach them how to use those tools to think. And in that way, we become a part of the solution and not just worried about some problem.
Amen. Amen. That is well said. And I am super excited that we were able to dive into this topic, not too much in depth, but enough to offer some encouragement, some tools, some background as to thinking and why it's important to really make sure that we get our students back into thinking, because our society is really being challenged in the area of critical thinking, and unless we start talking about it and planning as instructors, planning purposefully, consciously to make sure that we incorporate the correct thinking tools in it, then we're just going to keep doing a disservice to our students and the society.
As a society as a whole, because we need more people. We need more people to think, not fewer.
Right. That is the word. I hope you enjoyed my conversations with Kevin today, and we'll put into use some of the tips that he shared with us, or some of the solutions he offered on critical thinking or thinking in general. Please check out the last episode I did with Kevin titled Cultural Relevance of Mathematics. That is also a very rich episode, and you will learn the meaning of his name, as we previously mentioned in that episode. If you'd like to be a sponsor of one of my shows, do contact me. The details are in the description box. Also, if you would like to just donate to support the work that I'm doing, amplifying Black voices, amplifying minority voices, bringing you information from diverse perspectives, focusing on entertainment, education, business, cultural capacity building, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any of these topics are welcome, and I will be very happy to bring you on the show if we do align. If you want to just sponsor my show, I will be grateful for your support also in that regard. Until next time, Karibu, everybody.